It's me. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. Not really. The problem is Erin Patterson's beef Wellington. I wish that rhymed. It did not. But anyway, it is your girl Georgia back at you with the Erin Patterson trial. I am still solo because it is literally the same day of recording, okay? It is my third hour of recording and my children and my butt are both getting restless, but we have to persevere. We have to get through this case. Olivia is still MIA because, it is literally the same day. We are continuing on with the Erin Patterson case. Hopefully you are enjoying the sound of my voice more than I am. I'm getting rather sick of it. Being left alone with my own thoughts, praying Olivia comes back to save me from myself. Anyway, I'm also starving. But anyway, we're going to persevere. Today we're talking the closing arguments of the Erin Patterson case and the ultimate verdict. By the time we got to this stage of the trial, you could tell something had shifted in the courtroom, subtle things. The prosecutor's lectern, which had been pointed squarely at Erin Patterson in the witness box for the past 7 weeks, but was now angled at the jury. It was time for closing arguments, and with that came what the prosecution called the scaffolding of their case. Dr. Annette Rogers laid out what she described as the 4 deceptions, 4 calculated lies that, according to the prosecution, Erin Patterson told in the lead up to the aftermath of the deadly beef Wellington lunch. 1. The fabricated cancer diagnosis. 2. The poisoning of the Wellington itself. 3. The deliberate attempt to appear as sick as her guests. And 4. The cover-up that followed. Things like serving her children leftovers and disposing of the dehydrator. Dr. Rogers told the jury that the defence may try to say Erin acted out of panic, but she asked them to reject that entirely. Quote, "These are lies that persisted over many days." End quote. She began by zooming in on control. Erin Patterson, the prosecution argued, had total control over the meal, right down to the choosing individual beef Wellingtons instead of one large log, like the recipe had suggested. Dr. Rogers told the jury Erin used that control, and I quote, "with devastating effect," end quote. Because what other explanation could there be for why her 4 guests were poisoned and Erin was not? Then came the first deception, the cancer claim. We already know from serious testimony that Erin had told her guests she wanted to talk to them about a serious health issue. Ian Wilkinson remembered it clearly. The lunch was supposedly about a recent cancer diagnosis, a conversation about how to break the news to the children. But Erin Patterson, the court heard, had never had cancer. Dr. Rogers told the jury to look at this claim for what it was, a lie, planted long before the lunch even happened. She pointed to the text between Erin and Gail Patterson, where Erin wrote, quote, "I think it's better spoken about in person," end quote. And then there were screenshots found on Erin's computer, searches for stage 4 ovarian cancer and metastatic brain disease. Dr. Rogers told the jury that Erin had fleshed out this lie using Google and had done so with the confidence of someone who never thought she'd be caught, because she said her lie would die with them. Now, when it came to how the death cap mushrooms actually ended up in the meal, this is where things got interesting, because Dr. Rogers acknowledged that the prosecution can't fill in every blank. She said sometimes a jury will have to infer things based on the evidence around it. Take this. Erin's computer activity showed she'd been on the iNaturalist website, the same site where 2 mushroom sightings had been posted earlier that year. One in Loch, one in Outram. And around the same time, Erin's phone pinged off towers near both places. 10 days after the Loch post, her phone registered there for about an hour. Later that day, she bought the dehydrator. In May, a similar pattern, a mushroom post appears on iNaturalist, and Erin phone appears in the area soon after. There was no screenshot of those exact posts on her device, but the prosecution asked, does that matter? And then we were back to the dehydrator, a key piece of evidence that Erin admitted to throwing out at the tip, not long after the guests were poisoned. Prosecution argued she did this to hide it, to destroy what they called the delivery mechanism of the poison. Another part of the puzzle, the smell. Erin had said the dried mushrooms smelled strong, while a witness from the health department remembered Erin saying they smelled funny. Dr. Tom May, the court's mycology expert, had earlier testified that death caps, when dried, gave off a strong and unpleasant odour. So the prosecution asked, if the smell was that bad, why keep them? Why mix them into a special lunch? And more than that, why use dried mushrooms at all, when Erin had already purchased 1.75 kilos of fresh ones in the days leading up to the lunch? Erin says she ate a kilo of them. But even so, the prosecution pressed. Why forage or buy more? Why use ones that made you nervous about overpowering the dish? It doesn't make sense. Then came one of the prosecution's darkest assertions, that Erin Patterson used what she called a nourishing family meal, a home-cooked dish served with mashed potatoes and green beans, as a vehicle to deliver poison. They brought up how Erin had previously blitzed mushrooms into a powder and hidden it into her children's food. So when no traces of death cap mushrooms were found in the Wellington leftovers, only button mushrooms, the prosecution said, well, of course, you just powdered them. They wouldn't be visible under a microscope. Then the plates came back into focus. Ian Wilkinson had testified that Erin served the meal on mismatched plates and remembered hers being a smaller plate, slightly different in colour. Erin claimed they had all been served on mismatched plates from her collection. But Dr. Rogers told the jury that Wilkinson's memory had been remarkably accurate. He remembered the food, the layout of the room, even a sick-looking tree outside. She argued that his recollection about the plates was likely just as reliable. And she told the jury not to be swayed by minor contradictions, like Erin's son recalling white plates being loaded into the dishwasher. That, she said, didn't invalidate Ian Wilkinson's version of events. Dr. Nanette Rogers, SC, the lead prosecutor, wrapped up her closing address with a powerful statement that Erin Patterson hadn't just misled police and medical staff. She had deliberately made evidence vanish. Her example, phone A. Dr. Rogers claimed its disappearance wasn't accidental or careless. It was calculated, deliberate, an attempt to cripple the investigation and prevent any further digital trace of Erin's movements to Lock and Outram, where death cap mushrooms had been sighted. And then one by one, Dr. Rogers ticked off what she described as Erin's many lies. Some she admitted, some she hadn't. Lies to friends, to family, to medical professionals, and, Dr. Rogers claimed, to the jury itself. She told them flatly, there are so many lies, it's hard to keep track. Once the prosecution rested, the defence stepped up. Colin Mandy SC stood and gently adjusted the lectern, now facing the jury, and began with two central questions. Was there a reasonable possibility the mushrooms were added to the meal by accident? And was there a reasonable possibility that Erin Patterson didn't intend to kill or seriously harm her guests? If the answer to either of those was yes, he told the jury, then Erin Patterson must not be found guilty. Reasonable doubt, he said, was the only test that mattered. The style shift was obvious. Where Dr. Rogers had delivered a machine gun burst of facts, evidence and sharp logic, Colin Mandy moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. He let his arguments breathe. He asked the jury to think about human nature, the reality of memory, and the danger of fitting chaotic human behaviour into neat little prosecution boxes. Mandy argued that the Crown had built their case on assumptions that Erin was guilty from the start, and then cherry-picked evidence to support the narrative. He urged the jury to look at the broader context. He said it was possible Erin gave slightly different versions of her story, not because she was lying, but because that's how memory worked, especially when you're traumatised and being questioned repeatedly by over 20 different people. He even pointed to inconsistencies on the doctor's testimonies, suggesting that honest, capable professionals also remembered things differently. No one was lying. This was just the nature of human recollection. And then came motive, or rather, the absence of one. Mandy called it the anti-motive. Why, he asked, would Erin kill her children's only grandparents? People who were an enormous source of emotional and financial support. He reminded the court of the family closeness. Don tutoring Erin's son in science, a rocket car video in the backyard, the property titles that still had Simon's name on them long after the marriage had ended. He argued there was no rage, no financial benefit, no evidence of threats. The prosecution, he said, had spent more time searching for animosity than it had actually proving it. Were they really asking the jury to believe Erin orchestrated a triple poisoning over a minor tax argument and a brief relationship spat from 2022? Then he turned to the so-called murder weapon, the dehydrator. Mandy posed what he called a common-sense question. If you were planning a murder, would you really post photos of your dehydrator online in a group of amateur-style crime sleuths? Would you buy it using your own name and credit card at your local store? Would you share pictures of the mushrooms inside it? To Mandy, that wasn't the behaviour of a scheming killer. It was more like an overwhelmed woman spiralling into panic. He said Erin dumped the dehydrator, not to cover up a crime, but because she feared that's what others might think. And she knew exactly how bad it looked. And for the leftovers, Mandy pointed out that Erin told police exactly where to find them. If she was hiding something, wouldn't she have tossed them in the neighbour's bin? Or buried them somewhere? Instead, she told the cops where they were straight away. Colin Mandy also tackled the prosecution's claim that Erin acted selfishly after the lunch. Dr. Rogers had painted a picture of someone in survival mode, dodging medical help, refusing treatment, lying to the health department. But Mandy asked, if she truly knew the food was poisoned, why go to the hospital at all? Why not just vanish? He argued that her panic and inconsistencies were not signs of guilt, but signs of fear, confusion, and emotional shock. And finally, he bit back at the idea of planning. If Erin had plotted this for months, he asked, would she really have been so reckless? The Crown had portrayed her as some master manipulator, but Mandy called her an anti-planner. She didn't hide the dehydrator. She didn't wipe her digital footprint. She didn't bury the evidence. She didn't even avoid a suspicion. If anything, all signs immediately pointed to her. If this was a plan, he argued, it was a very, very bad one. By the time Mandy wrapped up for the day, Justice Christopher Beale told the jury they were nearing the end. The trial was finally drawing to a close, but both barristers had left the jury with one shared instruction. Don't get caught in the weeds. Step back. Look at the full picture. Don't judge the jigsaw pieces. Look at the entire painting. Like one of those impressionist portraits, you've got to stand back to see it clearly. The defence wrapped up their second day of closing arguments the next day, and it was a big one. Colin Mandy SC came out swinging. He stood up in front of the jury and essentially said, the prosecution has been building a story based on assumptions, half-truths, and the kind of hindsight that makes everything seem clearer than it really was. But this isn't a morality trial. Erin Patterson isn't on trial for being a liar. She's on trial for a triple murder. And Mandy made it clear that those two things are not the same. Let's break down the key pillars of his argument. First, deception. The prosecution has painted Erin as two-faced, manipulative, and duplicitous. Mandy argued that yes, maybe there were moments of frustration with her in-laws, but they were isolated, not the kind of sustained venom that you'd expect from someone plotting a mass poisoning. He called it a minor aberration in an otherwise close and loving relationship. And the messages? He said the Crown had trawled through months of them, and that this spat over Simon's share of child support and a surgeon's bill, that's the best that they could find. He told the jury this wasn't a toxic, hateful dynamic. The Pattersons were polite, to a fault. So any conflict naturally stood out, not because it was extreme, but because it was rare. Then there was the issue of Erin's online mushroom activity, specifically her use of the iNaturalist website to look up death caps. The prosecution argued this was suspicious, part of a bigger plan, but Mandy pointed out that this so-called research happened 14 months before the fatal lunch. He said she was online for maybe 2 minutes, just enough to check whether death caps grow in South Gippsland. They don't, and that was that. No pattern, no obsessing, no revisiting the site. He said if the prosecution wants the jury to believe she was watching that site like a hawk, refreshing for new sightings, waiting to strike, they'd need evidence of that. But there isn't any. No device records, no browsing history, nothing tying her to those sightings in Loch or Outram. In fact, both those death cap reports were made by people who testified, and one of them even said she removed the mushrooms to stop them from spreading. Then, Mandy addressed the dehydrator, that now infamous purchase from Facebook Marketplace. The prosecution says she bought it on April 28th and possibly drove to Loch that same day to forage. Mandy said, hang on, if she already had enough mushrooms to kill 5 people, like the Crown claims, why would she need more? And if she was planning to use them, why didn't she strike earlier, at the lunch with Don and Gail a month before the fatal one? He asked the jury, are we really going to convict someone based on speculation, stacked on speculation? And then we get to the plates. Ian Wilkinson, the surviving guest, had testified that everyone else was served on large grey plates, while Erin used a different one. A reddish, orange, brown one. Reddish, orange or brown. But Mandy tore this memory apart. These colour plates, nowhere to be seen in the police search video. Even Simon, Erin's ex-husband, said she didn't have much crockery. Mandy suggested that if Erin really wanted to poison just her in-laws, she wouldn't risk doing it by plate. She'd mark the pastries directly. That's how you'd make sure the right person got the right dish. Then there was the so-called ruse, the idea that Erin lured her guests under false pretenses about a cancer diagnosis. Mandy told the jury the guests didn't even hear about any health concerns until after the lunch, after they'd eaten. If that lie was supposed to die with them, it wasn't a very effective one. He went on to challenge one of the prosecution's biggest points, the timeline of the symptoms. The prosecution suggested Erin was faking pretending to be sick to deflect suspicion. But Mandy says there's a simple explanation. She got sick earlier because she was tasting the food while she cooked. Specifically, she was making a mushroom paste, a duck cell, and she added dried mushrooms when it tasted bland. So if there was poison, she ingested it earlier than anyone else. We've heard evidence from a toxicology expert that people can experience a range of reactions to death caps, from mild gastro to full-blown organ failure. Factors like age, weight, even how soon you vomit can all influence severity. And Mandy pointed out, Erin did vomit. We just don't exactly know when. If she was faking, wouldn't she have just claimed to vomit right after lunch? Instead, she was vague, unsure, not exactly the behaviour of someone crafting a lie. And then there's the emotional side of all this. Erin admitted to binge eating and purging on the day of the lunch. She reportedly ate leftover cake and then vomited, a behaviour consistent with her past. Not necessarily poisoning. Mandy urged the jury to consider that this wasn't a story of cold calculation, but a day that spiralled out of control. So what are we left with? A handful of text messages, a brief visit to the mushroom website 14 months prior, an online dehydrator purchase, and a vague memory about plates. Mandy's closing message to the jury was simple but sharp. Suspicion is not proof. Lies don't equal guilt, and speculation doesn't add up to murder. So let's talk about how the defence spent their final hours in court. Colin Mandy SC was doing what he's been doing all week, methodically deflating the prosecution's case, one so-called deception at a time. If the prosecution floated a balloon, he made it his mission to pop it. He reminded the jury that after the lunch, Erin Patterson's behaviour might have seemed odd, but odd didn't mean guilty. There's no rule of human behaviour. He told them, you can't just take what someone does under extreme pressures and translate it into a murder conviction. He then turned to the witness box. Now, Erin didn't have to testify, he said. She wasn't legally required to take the stand, but she did. Voluntarily. And Colin Mandy reminded the jury that she sat there day after day facing withering cross-examination from one of the most experienced prosecutors in the state. He said she was careful, sometimes even pedantic in her answers. But she didn't lie, not in the courtroom, even when the truth was embarrassing or downright shameful. She admitted what she'd done wrong. I'm ashamed, she told the jury. I was wrong. And Mandy told them, look, she exposed herself to intense scrutiny and she didn't crumble. That matters. And as the day wore on, Mandy zeroed in on the 4 key deceptions the prosecution had spent so long trying to build their case around. Mandy didn't just deny them, he dissected them. The prosecution tried to suggest that Erin was a duplicitous character based on testimony from a Facebook friend. Mandy straight up told the jury, this woman wasn't a real friend. They'd never even spoken on the phone. You shouldn't convict someone based on that. Then, there's the infamous diarrhea stop. Erin said she pulled over on the way to the hospital because she was unwell. Her teenage son didn't remember it, but Mandy pointed out that the kid also doesn't remember stopping at the BP servo for food either. There's video evidence of that, so memory gaps, not that unusual. And about her supposedly faking illness. Mandy said if this was a calculated ruse, Erin would have been falling over herself to get treatment. She'd be begging for IVs, pleading for meds, but she wasn't. She was hesitant. That's not the behaviour of someone faking it. Then came the prosecution's selective storytelling. Mandy accused them of cherry-picking. He said they'd highlighted evidence that painted Erin in a bad light, while conveniently ignoring anything that could exonerate her, like the fact that a forensic doctor said there was some evidence she had a diarrhea illness, or the forensic pathologist who described varying grades of mushroom poisoning and that Erin's illness was consistent with one of the milder ones. Now that brings us to the big concept of incriminating conduct. What Erin did after the lunch. The prosecution wants the jury to believe her post-lunch behaviour was suspicious, deceptive, even incriminating. But Mandy told them by the Tuesday afternoon, Erin was being blamed. 4 people were in the hospital. She'd cooked the meal. Everyone was pointing fingers. What do people do in that kind of pressure? Some lash out, others retreat. Erin withdrew. She freaked out. And none of it, Mandy says, proves her guilt. He focused on a turning point, August 1st. That was the day Erin was allegedly asked by her ex-husband, quote, "Is that what you used to poison them?" End quote, referring to the dehydrator. Simon denies saying it, but Mandy says the moment was the axis on which Erin's world turned. Because that's when Erin had this gut-wrenching realisation. Maybe the mushrooms weren't all from the Asian grocer. Maybe she'd accidentally mixed in foraged ones. Maybe she had poisoned them. Mandy says, if that's true, you can't treat her behaviour afterwards as proof of guilt. You have to treat it as panic. Mandy made another key point. The prosecution is asking the jury to fill gaps with speculation. Like Erin using iNaturalist. Sure, she looked up a site that has mushroom maps, but there's zero evidence she saw the two infamous posts by Christine McKenzie and Dr. Tom May. No device record, no browser history, no screenshots, nothing. Yet the prosecution's saying, well, maybe she saw them. Mandy's response, you can't convict someone on maybe. You need proof. And just before wrapping up, Mandy returned to Erin's testimony. He said she didn't try to charm the jury. She didn't spin a sob story. She was just honest, even when it hurt. And then he addressed the jury directly. He said, you don't find someone guilty just because you think the prosecution's case is a bit better than hers. That's not how it works. The prosecution must prove every element beyond reasonable doubt. He then turned to the prosecution's own metaphor against them. Remember their jigsaw analogy? That all the pieces, when assembled, form a clear picture of guilt. Mandy said, hang on. When you build a jigsaw, you already know what the picture is. It's printed on the box. The prosecution, he argued, had decided Erin was guilty, then arranged the evidence to fit that picture. But what if they're forcing pieces where they don't belong? And then came his final message. This isn't a boxing match. It's not a competition. It's a high jump. And only the prosecution has to clear the bar. The defence doesn't have to prove anything. Erin is presumed innocent. That's the starting point. And he told the jury, if you think it's possible that she did it, that's not enough. If you think she maybe did it, still not enough. If you probably think she did it, nope, still not guilty. Only if you're sure beyond a reasonable doubt does the law allow a conviction. And with that, he sat down. That was it. And then Justice Beale turned to the jury and basically said, right, that's the defence done. Go home. So that was the closing arguments. After 9 long weeks, the jury retired to consider its verdict, whether Erin Patterson is guilty or not guilty of murder and attempted murder. I have to say that both sides, both legal representations, nailed their job. Like, they've both provided really, really great arguments and have represented their cases very, very well. They are both the best of the best, so I'm not surprised. So the verdict. So on Monday the 7th of July, after 10 weeks of evidence, cross-examinations and courtroom theatre, this was the first day of the 11th week, and by 1:38 p.m, an email dropped saying the jury had made up their minds. At 2:15 p.m. sharp, the courtroom floor opened. The air inside was electric and tense. Erin Patterson entered, flanked by 2 prison guards dressed in a paisley blouse. No emotion, just blank. She took her usual seat in the dock. Colin Mandy, SC, Sophie Stafford and Solicitor Bill Doog, her defence team, leaned in to speak with her. A friend, Ali, was seated close by, as she had been through much of the trial. Then came the 3 heavy knocks. If you've been in court, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Terrifying. Justice Beale entered, bowed heads, silence. Then Justice Beale said, quote, has the jury reached a verdict? And the answer was yes. One by one, the charges were read out. Attempted murder, Ian Wilkinson, guilty. Murder, Heather Wilkinson, guilty. Murder, Gail Patterson, guilty. Murder, Don Patterson, guilty. 12 jurors, not one looked at Erin as they delivered her fate. There's a theory whispered in the courthouse corridors that if jurors don't meet the eyes of the accused, it's not a good sign. Maybe it's superstition, maybe it's guilt. But that day, not one glance. And Erin, she didn't even flinch. Lips tight, face neutral. If there was emotion, she didn't show it. There was no family from the Wilkinsons or Patterson sides in the court that day. Apparently they decided their last day would be the day the evidence closed, not verdict day. After weeks of sitting through gut-wrenching testimony and evidences, maybe that was their line in the sand. I can't say I blame them. Justice Beale thanked the jury, called them exceptional, said they'd kept their spirits high, even when the trial stretched far beyond its expected length. 3 minutes later it was over, just like that. 10 weeks of trial, 7 days of deliberation, 1 email, 4 words, all accounts, guilty. Outside the court, the media frenzy was in full swing. Live crosses, satellite vans, boom mics, 20 photographers pressed up against the glass. Colin Mandy exited shortly after the verdict was released. So did Detective Stephen Eppenstall, the lead investigator who'd been tied to this case for over 2 years. We also saw Erin's supporter, Ali. She made a brief public statement, said she was sad. She said the backlash against Erin's supporters has been ugly. She asked for the nastiness to stop and for the public to show some restraint. And I want to pause on that because no matter what you think of Erin Patterson, this story has shattered lives. Don, Gail and Heather are dead. Ian Wilkinson, nearly dead. Community has been splintered. Friendships destroyed. And 2 kids have just watched their mother be convicted of a triple murder. There are no winners here, only wreckage. So what now? Justice Beale flagged a plea hearing, also called a pre-sentence hearing, likely in the first week of August. That's when we'll hear more from both sides before sentencing is handed down. So that's the story of Erin Patterson so far. I do believe there's still suppression orders in place, and I do believe she has the opportunity to appeal. So yeah, I feel for her children. I feel for the families of Don, Gail and Heather. I feel for everyone involved, obviously. I'm not sure I'm fully convinced either way. Like, the defense and the prosecutor did such a good job of, pleading their case. And, I don't know if, even though it does look likely that she's guilty, I don't know if the prosecution did prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. I don't know. It's hard to say. But yeah, I'm not the jury, so I don't have to come to a conclusion. She looks guilty. She seems guilty, and she was found guilty. So, yeah, fucking wild ride. But I will let you know when she is sentenced or whether there's an appeal. We'll follow this case closely. And, yeah, thanks for listening. Give us a rating. Follow the show. Send us an email at nurseratchetpodcast.com or follow our Instagram. Thank you for listening. Thanks for staying with me while I flew solo on this case. I hope you enjoyed it, even though I'm by myself. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Don't know what I'm going to do, but hopefully Olivia will be back. Fingers and toes crossed. Okay, bye.